First snow, silent song. A solitary snowflake, tentative and frail, brushed Redemption Gulch's thirsty soil. Widow Willow, on her porch swing, watched. This hesitant kiss of winter hinted at a deeper cold to come. Unbidden, a soft drone slipped from her lips, a tuneless air composed of wind and encroaching frost, a sound as stark as the gulch itself. Redemption Gulch, a graveyard of shattered ambitions where the gaunt husks of buildings clawed at the sky like broken fingers, their empty windows like vacant sockets staring into oblivion. Dust devils danced, ephemeral cyclones whispering tales of mirthless laughter and the echoes of long-gone gun battles that had shattered the fragile peace. Even the sun seemed to shy away, casting elongated, somber shadows that stretched like grasping claws. As snow descended in earnest, a hushed, swirling veil, Willow's hum deepened into a plaintive song. A lament for vanished loves, for promises unkept, for aspirations turned to dust. Her voice, etched by years of hardship, weathered by sorrow, possessed a haunting loveliness, a resilient core echoing the desolate vista. She sang of hopeful men who had flocked to Redemption Gulch seeking fortune only to be embraced by the unyielding earth. She sang of wives who had followed, hearts brimming with optimism, only to become widows in a land bereft of solace. She sang of children born into destitution, their innocent laughter stifled by circumstance's relentless grip. Willow closed her eyes, snowflakes clinging to her lashes like frozen tears. Each note, a stinging memory of all she had forfeited. Thomas, her husband, felled by fever. Samuel, her son, seduced by the lure of gold, never to return. The combined weight pressed upon her shoulders, a burden borne with quiet fortitude. The wind sharpened, whipping the snow into a furious ballet. Willow's song swelled to meet it, a declaration against the looming despair. Not just a dirge of loss, but a hymn of survival, a spirited stand against crushing sorrow. A sliver of hope, however fragile, that even the harshest winter yielded to spring's eventual return. Her face, framed by wisps of silver hair escaping her bonnet, was a canvas of grief. Lines around her eyes, deepened by years of squinting against the sun and the salt of tears, testified to a life lived teetering on the edge. Yet, a flicker of defiance burned in her gaze, a spark that refused to be snuffed. Her lips, pale and thin, trembled as she sang, each syllable a delicate offering to the unforgiving land. She sang of compassion, of the gentle acts that bound the fractured community together. She sang of shared repasts, of helping hands, of murmured comfort offered in the face of overwhelming devastation. She sang of the quiet strength of the women, the steadfast guardians of Redemption Gulch who tended the embers of hope against relentless misfortune. A gust ripped through the gulch, a wounded animal's howl. The snow thickened, obscuring the already vague outlines of buildings. Willow's song ascended to meet the tempest, a defiant cry against the encroaching night. A song of loss, undeniably, but also of love, of fortitude, of a spirit that would not break. The first snow of winter, a silent ballad, and a solitary woman pouring out her soul to a world that had forgotten how to hear. Yet somewhere, within the swirling white, the song endured. Carried on the wind, it wove through the desolate landscape, a delicate thread of promise in winter's very heart. Riders on the horizon. Dust devils danced on the horizon, mocking mirages in the afternoon heat. Silas, perched atop the water tower, squinted. He'd seen enough shimmering heat haze to know this was different. This was movement. Real movement. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the wind and grabbed the crank for the town bell. No point in being subtle. Redemption Gulch needed every second it could get. The bell's clang ripped through the drowsy silence, a discordant symphony of impending doom. Dogs barked, chickens squawked, and the rhythmic thud of hammers from the blacksmiths faded into silence. 6 riders. Silas counted them again, just to be sure. 6 black silhouettes against the pale sky, growing larger with each agonizing heartbeat. At their head rode Creek Mallory, known as the Stone. Silas had heard tales. Tales of a man who could stare down a grizzly and not blink. A man who'd single-handedly held off a band of Comanches for 3 days, surviving only on rainwater and raw courage. Or madness. Silas wasn't sure which. Mallory's face was a roadmap of scars, each one a testament to a life lived on the razor's edge. He sat his horse, a massive black stallion named Night, with the rigid posture of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Beside him rode a woman, her face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. They called her Whisperer for the way she could slip through the shadows unheard and unseen. Some said she was a witch, others claimed she was a ghost, brought back to settle old scores. She carried a Winchester rifle across her lap, its polished gleam a silent promise of violence. Then there was Razor Jack, a wiry man with a grin that could curdle milk. He was a gambler, a cheat, and a killer, renowned for his speed with a deck of cards and a Bowie knife. Silas could almost hear the metallic whisper of the blade being drawn. Preacher Pete followed close behind, his Bible clutched in one hand, a Colt Peacemaker strapped to his hip. A hypocrite through and through. He'd preach salvation 1 minute and send a man to hell the next. His horse, a sickly gray mare, seemed to share his dour disposition. Bringing up the rear were the twins, Dynamite Dan and Boomer Bob. Two hulking brutes, inseparable since birth, with a penchant for explosions and a complete disregard for the consequences. They were the muscle, the blunt instruments in Mallory's arsenal. Dan idly tossed a stick of dynamite in his hand, catching it with a practiced ease that sent a shiver down Silas's spine. As the riders neared, the horses grew restless. Night pawed the ground, snorting, his eyes rolling white. Even the usually docile horses tied to the saloon's hitching post whinnied nervously, their ears twitching. The air crackled with unspoken tension, thick enough to choke on. Mallory reined in his stallion at the edge of town, his gaze sweeping over the deserted street. The only sound was the creaking of the wind vane atop the general store and the nervous shuffling of hooves. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to silence Redemption Gulch. He dismounted, the movement stiff, almost painful. He walked toward the saloon, each step measured, deliberate. The others followed, their shadows stretching long and menacing in the fading sunlight. Redemption Gulch held its breath, waiting to see what storm had just ridden into town. A melody halts the charge. The wind, a frigid lash, stung exposed skin as the 6 riders topped the ridge. The village lay cradled below, smoke twirling innocently from chimneys, a deceptive scene of tranquil repose. Creek, the stone, Mallory, face an impassive crag against the gale, surveyed the scene. His gaze, the color of gunmetal, missed nothing. He tracked the brigands to this unsuspecting sanctuary. Tonight, retribution would come. Then, a fragile sound, reedy at first, rode the wind. Not the lowing of cattle nor a hound's bark. A song. A solitary voice, as pure as mountain spring water, cut through the stark landscape. The melody, a haunting threnody, seemed to emanate from the very bedrock of the valley. It spoke of bereavement, of trials weathered, yet also of an unyielding fortitude. Creek lifted a gauntlet hand. The riders, a rough-hewn assortment of hardened men, checked their mounts. The abrupt quiet, save for the plaintive tune, was unsettling. He felt the ingrained impulse to press forward, to deliver swift punishment, but the song held him fast. It struck a chord within him long thought silenced, buried deep beneath scar tissue and rigid resolve. "What in damnation is that caterwauling?" growled Boone, a hulking brute with a visage like a crumpled parchment. He shifted, uneasy in his saddle, hands straying to his rifle. Creek ignored him, his attention consumed by the sound. It was visceral, untamed, a primal expression of grief and hope entwined, tugging at his stoicism, threatening to breach the dam, holding back a torrent of pain. The other riders exchanged perplexed glances. Jedediah, the group's youngest, barely old enough for whiskers, looked almost frightened. Even Silas, usually imperturbable, worried his lip. They were men of action, not given to whimsy. This was unnerving. The song swelled as they descended into the valley, originating from the village's edge where the forest met the first dusting of snow on skeletal branches. Creek's grip tightened on the reins. A duty needed doing. Innocent lives hung in the balance. Yet an undeniable feeling washed over him, something profound was unfolding. The song was a warning, an entreaty, a dare. "Stay put," he graveled, his voice rough from disuse and the biting air. He dismounted, his movements stiff, measured. Leaving his rifle, he drew only his knife. "Creek, what in blazes are you doing?" Boone demanded, impatience lacing his tone. "We need the element of surprise." Creek offered no response. He moved towards the village, drawn by the unseen force of the music, feeling the weight of his men's questioning eyes. He didn't care. He had to discern the song's source. He had to understand why it had halted him, silencing the war cry poised on his tongue. The melody sharpened now, revealing the singer's torment, a raw emotion that mirrored his own buried hurts. It was a woman's song, her voice carrying the burden of existence, yet finding within that weight the strength to sing. He crested a small rise, and there she stood, a lone figure at the wood's edge, outlined against the failing light. Her back was to him, yet he could make out the slope of her shoulders, the dark cascade of her hair. She sang to the wind, to the snow, to the silent, sentinel trees. Widow Willow. The name, like a sigh on the breeze, felt like a recognition. He had heard whispers of her, the woman dwelling alone in the forest, touched by sorrow. Now he understood. The song wasn't merely a lament, it was a bulwark, a defiance, a testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit. He stopped, yards away, paralyzed. He knew with bone-deep certainty that the hunt was suspended. The bandits would wait. Tonight he would listen. Tonight he would remember the essence of feeling. Echoes of yesterday. The harmonica's mournful cry, a keening sound, knifed through the saloon's hazy atmosphere. Usually immune to such displays, Creek found himself frozen. The ballad, a simple lament for a love prematurely ended, tugged at buried depths, feelings he'd long entombed beneath layers of cynicism and violence. He hadn't stirred since that almost imperceptible twitch in Rooster's fingers, the sign that trouble approached from the west. Creek's gut hadn't steered him wrong, and now the 6 riders were pinned inside, listening to a woman whose voice dripped with honeyed sorrow, a tale that resonated with each of them in different ways. But for Creek, it was a seismic event. Though the melody was unfamiliar, it echoed a phantom tune from decades past, a song that belonged to a forgotten self. His jaw clenched. He hadn't been Creek, the stone Mallory, then. He'd simply been Caleb. The harmonica descended and the world around Creek fractured. He stood beneath the boughs of an ancient oak, its leaves shimmering emerald in the summer sun. Beside him, Elara, her hair spun from sunshine, laughed, a sound like tinkling glass. She was everything he wasn't, radiant, hopeful, brimming with life. He recalled the delicate warmth of her hand in his, fingers twined tight. The scent of wildflowers clung to her dress, the amber fire in her eyes as the sun caught them. He remembered her cherished melody, a folk song passed down by her mother, now resurrected by this saloon singer. "Caleb, you fret too much," she chided, her voice a playful caress. "The world possesses more light than you allow." He'd scoffed, a cynic even then. "It's coming, Elara. Shadow always creeps in." She leaned close, lips ghosting his. "Then we'll stand against it, together. We'll be the embers in the dark." That was the promise, etched in shared dreams beneath a canopy of stars. A modest farm, children's laughter, a lifetime of shared joy. He could almost feel the spectral weight of an infant in his arms, hear the imagined echo of children playing across golden fields. But the shadow had arrived, not as a creeping darkness, but in the form of ruthless men and the roar of gunfire. He'd been away, tending a sick horse at a neighboring spread. Upon his return, the farm was ablaze, and Elara. He squeezed his eyes tight, the memory a jagged shard in his heart. He discovered her beneath that oak, the very place where they'd spun their future. The wind chimes were forever silent. The harmonica soared, dragging him back to the present. The saloon's gloom, the drifting smoke, his men's curious stares, it all crashed back, a stark contrast to the pastoral vision. The singer concluded, the last note hanging like a fragile hope. Silence descended, punctuated only by the hearth's quiet crackle. Creek glanced at his hands, gnarled and scarred, a killer's implements. These were not the hands that once cradled Elara's. These were the hands that had buried her. He lifted his gaze, surveying his men. Rooster watched him, his expression inscrutable. Jebediah nervously polished his rifle. Even Silas, usually a monument of composure, seemed to give him space. Creek rasped, his voice unfamiliar, even to himself. "We ride at dawn," he declared, his tone a cold plateau. "Job waiting?" He pivoted towards the bar, haunted by echoes of yesterday. He needed oblivion in a glass. He needed to forget, however briefly. He needed to reclaim the stone, the man devoid of feeling, the man who didn't yearn for a life that couldn't exist. He needed to extinguish the memory of that light so he would not tremble before the encroaching dark. Beneath the steel. The harmonica wailed, a mournful cry that echoed beneath the steel belly of the iron serpent. Widow sings alone at first. Snow, perched on the engine's cowcatcher, swayed gently, her fingers dancing over the instrument's reeds. It wasn't just music, it was a raw nerve exposed, a shared pain amplified by the engine's thrum. Razor scoffed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the tracks. "Sentimental claptrap," he muttered, but the hand gripping his revolver loosened almost imperceptibly. The harsh lines etched around his eyes seemed to deepen, mirroring the furrows plowed into the arid landscape they were traversing. He saw, for a fleeting second, the burning homestead, smelled the acrid smoke, heard the screams he'd failed to silence. The memory slammed into him with the force of a physical blow, the harmonica's lament a cruel reminder of his inadequacy. Behind him, Silas shifted uncomfortably. The melody resonated with the hollow ache in his gut, the gnawing guilt he carried for abandoning his younger sister during the drought. He'd chosen survival, riding away with the last scraps of food, leaving her to face the dust-choked fields alone. Her face, gaunt and accusing, flashed before his eyes, superimposed over the endless stretch of desert. The song was a condemnation, a constant, mournful echo of his cowardice. Even Jericho, usually stoic and unreadable, seemed affected. His gaze, fixed on the horizon, softened. The notes pulled at the carefully constructed walls around his heart, threatening to expose the raw vulnerability beneath. He remembered the church bell ringing out on the morning he'd sworn his vows, the feel of the rough wool of his cassock, the horrified screams as the raiders descended. He saw the stained glass shatter, felt the splinter of wood beneath his fingernails as he clawed his way out from under the rubble. He'd left the priesthood and he couldn't bring himself to face the judgment for what he'd done and hadn't done since. Further back, Serafina's usual defiant glare dimmed. The haunting melody stirred a memory she usually kept buried deep, the sterile white walls of the orphanage, the cold indifference of the nuns, the gnawing hunger that was never truly satisfied. She saw herself, a scrawny child with eyes too old, watching the other children being chosen, adopted, loved. She'd learned early that love was a commodity she couldn't afford, and the lesson had hardened into a shell of cynicism. The harmonica chipped away at it, exposing the tender, wounded core beneath. Magnus, the giant, usually a wall of muscle and simmering rage, closed his eyes. He saw not the battlefield, not the carnage he usually envisioned, but his mother's hands, calloused and worn, stroking his hair. He heard her humming a lullaby, a simple tune filled with warmth and love. He remembered the day she died, ravaged by fever and the crushing weight of his helplessness. He hadn't been strong enough to save her. The harmonica's song was a bittersweet reminder of a tenderness he had lost, a connection to a world he could no longer reach. Even young Lily, usually so full of bravado, had a faraway look in her eyes. The melody evoked a memory of a swing set, rusty and creaking, in a long-forgotten park. She saw her father pushing her higher and higher, his laughter echoing in the summer air. Then the darkness, the screams, the metallic tang of blood. The swing set, empty and swaying, became a symbol of the innocence she had lost, a reminder of the carefree childhood that had been stolen from her. The train rattled onwards, its steel wheels grinding against the tracks. But beneath the metallic roar, beneath the harsh desert wind, the harmonica sang on, weaving its spell of shared pain and unspoken sorrow. The riders, their faces softened by the melody, were no longer just hardened gunslingers, but broken souls, each wrestling with their own ghosts, their own regrets, their own silent screams. For a moment, the promise of violence seemed distant, overshadowed by the weight of their shared humanity. The iron serpent hurtled towards its destination, carrying not just bodies, but burdens. The wind's interruption. The final notes of Widow Willow's lament lingered, delicate and radiant like sunbeams filtering through a dusty attic. Her song was a tale of bereavement, of affections unjustly taken, of existence shattered by brutality. Though her timbre resonated with sorrow, it held a staunch resilience, mirroring the towering crags that embraced Redemption Gulch. Creek, the stone Mallory, perched on a prostrate log at the wood's edge, felt the melody descend upon him like a leaden blanket. He'd heard it countless times before, etched into the town's soundscape, but today its woeful quality amplified the ache dwelling within him. He'd intended to ride straight through. He and his posse were in pursuit of claim jumpers plaguing northern prospectors. Yet the ballad, like a sorceress's charm, had gripped his reins, compelling him to a standstill. Abruptly, the atmosphere convulsed. A low rumble resonated from the depths of the canyon, swelling into a savage roar. The wind, an insatiable predator, descended upon Redemption Gulch. It hammered the saloon's windows, spun dust into miniature cyclones, and scattered fallen leaves in a frantic ballet. Pine boughs lashed at the heavens, their needles whispering like a nest of disturbed vipers. Widow Willow drew a sharp breath, her song abruptly truncated. The gale snatched her melody, scattering its notes like thistledown on the breeze. Her shawl, a time-worn tapestry of cerulean and jade, ballooned around her, momentarily swallowing her slight figure. She steadied herself, clutching the trunk of a wizened juniper for purchase. Creek tightened his jaw. He wasn't afraid of the wind itself. He'd weathered much harsher gales in his time, both tangible and figurative. His concern was for the song, for the vulnerable beauty it embodied. He'd witnessed too much depravity in his life, too much devastation wrought by avarice and malice. Widow Willow's singing offered a fragile, defiant beacon in the encroaching gloom. He couldn't bear to witness its demise. He scrutinized her, his gaze intent, gauging her reaction. Would she collapse, overwhelmed by the sudden assault? Would the wind shatter her spirit as easily as it splintered the frail branches of the surrounding brush? He noticed the slight tremor in her grasp, the subtle hunch of her shoulders against the tempest's might. But he also discerned the unyielding firmness of her chin, the spark of rebellion in her gaze. The wind howled, a spectral shriek that pierced the very core. A loose plank wrenched from the dilapidated livery tumbled end over end through the air. Horses neighed anxiously, their hooves drumming a frantic rhythm against the hard-packed earth. Even the mountains seemed to recoil from the wind's relentless force. The moment stretched, taut and fragile as spun glass. Creek held his breath, anticipating, awaiting the storm's retreat, hoping for Widow Willow to sing again, hoping that hope, like a hardy weed, could flourish even in the most barren conditions. He could feel his men's puzzled glances, all eyes on him. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. They would tarry. The brunt of the squall abated as swiftly as it had materialized. The wind, while still audible, mellowed into a somber sigh. The dust devils vanished, leaving a coating of grit on every surface. The pine branches, though ravaged, remained upright. Widow Willow gradually straightened, her gaze sweeping across the desolated terrain. She coughed, clearing the dust from her parched throat. The shawl settled once more upon her shoulders, its hues faded yet vibrant. Then she inhaled deeply, her lungs filling with a resurrected vigor. Creek exhaled slowly, a silent benediction on his lips. He glimpsed the ghost of a smile playing on her face. Resilience in song. The wind remained a ravenous beast, tearing at the world's edges with icy claws, yet a subtle change had occurred. Snow fell in denser waves, an obliterating drape against the dwindling daylight. Widow Willow's imposed quiet, it appeared, had been a flimsy barricade. She inhaled, the rasping sound echoing the stark, snow-laden boughs overhead. Then, once more, she sang. But this was no mere echo of the prior, frail tune. It resonated with a profundity drawn from the earth's very core. The notes retained their mournful quality, the bone-chilling sorrow, but now interwoven was a steely resolve, a push against the storm's ravenous appetite. It was the voice of a woman who had confronted oblivion and chosen to sing regardless. The words, ancient and indecipherable to most, spoke of bereavement, yes, but also of an indomitable spirit capable of blossoming even in winter's harshest grip. The melody ascended, a solitary beacon against the encroaching gloom. Razor, who had been observing her with eyes like sharpened flint, felt a shiver ripple through him. It wasn't the cold seeping through his thick furs. This was something deeper, an emotion long dormant stirring within. Hope? Perhaps. Or the faintest ember of humanity rekindling in his hardened heart. He flicked a glance at his companions, their faces obscured by the blizzard and shadowed beneath their brims. Though still tense and vigilant, hands close to their weapons, they betrayed a subtle shift, their stances almost imperceptibly softening, their gazes riveted on the woman who dared to raise her voice amidst such desolation. The song swelled, saturating the small clearing, pushing back against the oppressive weight of the elements. It articulated resilience, an intrinsic connection to something greater, and the potent ability of memory to nurture hope's fragile flame. Razor felt an insistent pull, a tug towards something long discarded, a sense of community, of kinship with the world around him. His grip on his rifle tightened momentarily, then eased almost without conscious volition. The metal felt frigid against his gloved palm, a familiar weight, a symbol of his purpose, his identity. Yet as Widow Willow's voice climbed, the gun felt increasingly like dead weight. He recalled his mother humming as she stitched by the hearth, a simple cadence that had filled their meager cabin with warmth and solace. He remembered her stories, tales of valor and empathy, emphasizing the importance of maintaining hope even when all seemed lost. He had once dismissed them as childish whims, antiquated sentiments. Now, as the widow's song unfurled, they echoed with a striking new clarity. The wind seemed to abate ever so slightly, as if even the storm were lending an ear. The snowflakes pirouetted more gently, a swirling ballet of white against the indigo canvas of the twilight sky. Razor's arm, rigid moments prior, began to ache. He looked at Widow Willow, her face a tapestry of hardship, her eyes gleaming with an interior luminescence that mocked the surrounding dark. He perceived not a threat, not an impediment, but a woman acquainted with sorrow and suffering, yet still summoning the resolve to sing. Slowly, deliberately, his movement stiff and unused, Razor lowered his rifle. The barrel descended towards the snow-covered earth. The faint snick as the hammer released was a fragile sound, nearly swallowed by the wind, yet it resonated in his ears like a resounding clap of thunder. He allowed the weapon to hang loosely at his side, no longer raised, no longer a menace. The cold seeped into his bare hand, yet he scarcely noticed. The melody had unlocked something dormant within him, a shard of ice dissolving in the warmth of her song. He wondered, fleetingly, if it was too late to retrieve the man he had once been. Guns forgotten. The wind, still laced with winter's frigid kiss, seemed to hush in anticipation. Razor, dust painting streaks of awe across his face, loosened his gun belt. The buckle, a frigid disc against his hesitant fingertips, clinked in the sudden quiet, the sound amplified. It dropped to the cracked earth with a muffled impact that seemed to shudder through the assembled riders, creating a wave of disquiet. Silas, suspicion twisting his features, fidgeted in his saddle, his grip tightening on the Winchester cradled in his lap. He shot a glare first at Razor, then at the solitary figure of Widow Willow, stark against the violet bruise of the gathering storm. A trap? Some kind of arcane trickery? Yet the song. The melody was a potent undertow tugging at something buried deep within him, a place long concealed beneath calluses and a harsh existence. It wound around him a hushed entreaty and a promise of peace that he couldn't quite grasp yet couldn't shake. One by one, their resolve began to crack. Jed, jaw clenched tight, flicked his gaze between Razor and the woman, seeking some explanation etched on the barren landscape. After a moment, with a frustrated grunt, he slid his revolver back into its leather sheath. He didn't unbuckle, not yet, but the gesture was a concession. The defiance seeped from his stance, leaving behind a fragile curiosity. The air grew heavy with unspoken inquiries and a blossoming vulnerability. The absence of their weapons was a palpable weight, like a missing limb. They felt exposed, stripped not only of protection but of a familiar skin. They were no longer just men defined by their guns, but something else entirely. Creek, the stone Mallory, usually a pillar of unwavering purpose, felt a strange discord within him. He'd ridden here hunting claim jumpers, promising himself they would face justice. But the song, it beckoned to a forgotten part of himself, submerged beneath years of upholding the law and burying his grief. Willow's voice, pure and penetrating, sliced through his armored soul. He glanced at her, a small, unassuming figure challenging the immensity of the plains. Protecting her, he understood with sudden clarity, held more significance than chasing shadows. He watched as Boone, the youngest of the crew, his face ashen, gingerly relinquished his grip on his rifle. The rifle clanged softly against the saddle horn, the sound intrusive in the silence. He stared at his hands, empty and strangely weightless. A holster, weathered hide, its once bright brass buckle dulled with age and neglect. The shadowed imprint of a revolver within, a dormant sentinel now disregarded. Another holster, scarred and creased, the ghost of a long-barreled Colt pressed into the worn leather. Vacant. Yet another, secured with a loosened thong, the mother-of-pearl handle of a pistol peeking out, catching the dying light. Creek drew a long breath. The air, thick with dust and the scent of impending rain. He knew what he must do. Swinging a leg over his saddle, he dismounted and paused, his hand hovering near the butt of his own gun. The familiar heft, the cold steel, usually a source of comfort, now felt alien, almost wrong. With a decisive motion, he unfastened his gun belt. The holster, molded to the shape of his palm, swayed as he placed the belt on the earth near his horse's hoofs. A quiet act, almost unnoticed, yet a clear declaration. He was backing away from the violence, at least for this moment. He was choosing to heed the call. His horse, a powerful bay named Justice, shifted restlessly, sensing the subtle shift in his rider. Creek stroked Justice's neck, murmuring calming words, seeking to settle the animal and perhaps his own troubled spirit. He lifted his gaze to Widow Willow, her face still veiled in shadow, her voice still weaving its enchantment on the wind. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew he couldn't turn away. Not yet. A new dawn. Creek dismounted, the leather of his saddle creaking in the sudden quiet after the song's end. He left his horse ground-tied, the reins trailing in the churned mud, and walked slowly towards the shadowed porch. The cold gnawed at his exposed skin, but he ignored it, his focus entirely on the figure shrouded within. He stopped at the edge of the porch, his boots heavy on the worn wood. "Widow Willow?" he asked, his voice low, respectful. He didn't want to startle her. "Ma'am, my name is Creek Mallory. I heard your song." Silence hung heavy in the air, thicker than the gathering snow clouds. Then a rustle from within the shadows. A hand, pale and thin, emerged, resting on the porch railing. It looked fragile, almost translucent in the dim light. "You are not like the others," a voice whispered, barely audible. It was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across stone, but there was a haunting melody beneath the roughness. Creek swallowed. "No, ma'am, I don't believe I am." He kept his hands visible, away from his gun. "I came here looking for claim jumpers, but, well, your song made me realize some things are more important." He paused, searching for the right words. He wasn't a man used to expressing his feelings, especially not to strangers, least of all to a woman who seemed to exist between worlds. "I can't pretend to understand what you've been through, ma'am, but I hear the sorrow in your voice. And I respect it." The hand on the railing trembled slightly. Respect. The word seemed foreign on her tongue. "It has been a long time since I have heard that word spoken with truth." "Then hear it now, Widow Willow. I'll admit I don't know what happened here, what drove you to this. But whatever it was, you deserve more than to be left alone with your grief." He waited, unsure of what to say next. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft sigh of the wind through the bare branches of the willow tree. Then, slowly, Widow Willow raised her head. He still couldn't see her face, hidden behind the veil of shadows and grief, but he felt her gaze on him, assessing, questioning. "They came," she whispered, the words laced with a pain that cut deeper than any blade. "They took everything." Creek nodded slowly. "I understand, ma'am. As much as I can, anyway. What will you do now?" "Sing. Remember." "That's not enough, is it?" Creek asked gently. Not for a life. Not for a future. The figure in the shadows remained still as if carved from stone. Then a soft, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Creek took a step closer, emboldened by the small gesture. Ma'am, those men who were with me came here looking for something too. They came looking for gold, but they found something else instead. They found your song and it's changed them. I think they'd be willing to help you. A long silence followed. Finally, Widow Willow spoke, her voice a mere breath. Help? Aye, ma'am. Help? Creek repeated. He turned then and walked back to where the 6 riders stood, their faces no longer hard, no longer greedy. He could see the glimmer of something new in their eyes, a flicker of understanding, of empathy. They were still rough men, hardened by life, but the song had planted a seed of something better within them. Mount up, Creek said, his voice firm but gentle. He didn't explain, didn't need to. They understood. As they swung into their saddles, they looked towards the porch, a silent acknowledgement of the woman who stood shrouded in shadow. Then Creek turned his horse, leading them away from Redemption Gulch. The first flakes of snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the landscape in a pristine white. It covered the churned mud, the trampled grass, the scars of greed and violence. As they rode, the 6 riders were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, the melody of Widow Willow's song still echoing in their hearts. The jingle of harnesses and squeak of saddle leather were the only sounds accompanying them, and the soft rhythmic drumming of their horses' hooves on the frosted earth. The air was crisp, clean, carrying the scent of pine and snow. A new dawn was breaking, not just over the land, but over them as well. It was a fragile dawn, easily broken, but it was there nonetheless. They rode on, away from the darkness of Redemption Gulch, towards an uncertain future, but one filled with the possibility of redemption.